This is your home for St. Cloud State hockey, keeping you up to date on the Nchc.
One-timer coming, they score! Ripped in! A bomb from Permix!
Women's WCHA.
So Dana Rasmussen fires and she scores! Dana Rasmussen for the Huskies alongside
The National Hockey League.
Dwayne Kaprizov in for a chance to win it! He scores! Kirill, the thrill is for real! Welcome to the NHL, a game winner!
And everything from the state of hockey.
St. Cloud Cathedral is now 42.6 seconds away from wrapping up the school's first ever title.
Welcome to the Huskies Warming House Podcast Den.
And welcome back to episode number 58 of the Huskies Warming House podcast. I'm Noah Grant, joined alongside Nick Maxon, and we are back after a week off, a week hiatus, and we have a lot of fun things to dissect. We missed a lot in the hockey world that we're going to get you caught up with in the Huskies Illustrated Weekly Roundup. Of course, a lot of milestone things happening. Unfortunately, a lot of leagues that are canceling or rearranging their plans, a bunch of NHL trade deadline news, and then we're going to jump into some men's hockey after that, talk about what it means for St. Cloud State, some players that are staying, some players that are leaving, taking a look at the schedule, and then stick around for a quote-unquote new segment, if you will, the Huskies Warming House Extra Ice session, in which we'll talk about a topic that we'll do a deep dive in at the end of the show. Should be a good one, and we'll get started with the Huskies Illustrated Weekly Roundup.
Center Ice View News and Notes. Center Ice View provides you with the best coverage of St. Cloud State Huskies hockey, from game notes, recaps, photos, and more. Go to centericeview.com.
Getting things going on the Huskies Illustrated Weekly Roundup. Starting on the international stage, the IIHF has abruptly canceled the Women's World Championship in Halifax and Truro, which was set to start on May the 6th. The timing and lack of a contingency plan has sparked outrage in the women's hockey community, including statements from American Daniel Taylor Renick and Kendall Coyne Schofield, remarking on the IIHF treating women's hockey as, quote, an afterthought. IIHF President Rene Fassel said the organization didn't have a safety net in place because there didn't appear to be a need for one. Staying in Canada, the 2021 Memorial Cup has been canceled, marking the second straight year that the trophy will not be awarded. The Canadian Hockey League announced in a statement, regrettably, we do not see a path in which we will be able to produce champions in our three-member leagues due to border restrictions and quarantining requirements. The Ontario Hockey League also canceled their season last week. It was the only major junior league to have never started play this year. The leagues will start to look towards next fall as next season rolls around, when the NHL hopes to start their regular season play on October the 12th with a full 82-game schedule. Training camps would open on September 22nd, which would include the addition of the NHL's 32nd team, the Seattle Kraken.
Speaking of those Seattle Kraken, Nick, an intriguing lawsuit has come out of the future addition of Seattle's franchise to the National Hockey League. A beloved punk rock bar named the Kraken Bar and Lounge did file a lawsuit in King County Superior Court alleging trademark infringement and tortious inference. No idea what that means, but apparently the establishment, which opened in 2011, is seeking $3.5 million and says the Seattle Kraken Hockey Club has irreparably damaged its brand. According to the Seattle Times, at issue is the team name itself, as well as the fact that the NHL organization plans to open a restaurant called the Kraken Bar and Grill at its practice facility this fall. The latter was the final straw for the existing bar owners, and their lawsuit said that they had to put up with the team name amid numerous new customers showing up in hockey apparel, which would be in contrast to the bar's typical music crowd. The Kraken Bar's regular patrons frequented the bar precisely because it was a dive bar associated with affordable food and drinks, as well as cutting-edge live music performances by well-known punk and metal bands. The existing establishment wants the team to be prevented from using the Kraken moniker and any additional names that could be mistaken for its own trademarks. The bar owners also claim the team's newly planned restaurant is, quote, sure to ruin the Kraken Bar and its near decade-old cherished image and reputation as one of Seattle's last dive bars, end quote, according to the lawsuit.
Moving back into the NHL, it was a busy 2 weeks for the league as the college hockey season came to a close on April 11th. Former North Dakota Fighting Hawk Shane Pinto made his NHL debut about a week ago in Ottawa, and the trade deadline came and went. Of notable moves since our last show, Columbus shipped out forward Nick Foligno to Toronto for a first-round pick this June and a 2022 fourth-round selection. Carl Soderberg was also shipped from Chicago back to Colorado, where he spent time before earlier in his career. Three of the big fish on the block also found new homes. Los Angeles dealt center Jeff Carter to Pittsburgh for a third and fourth round pick. Boston nabbed Taylor Hall and Curtis Lazar from Buffalo in exchange for a second round selection, and former Notre Dame Fighting Irish forward Anders Bjork and Sam Bennett went to Florida from Calgary. And the final trade of the deadline was a big one. Jacob Vrana, Richard Panik, a first and second round pick, all to Detroit, while the Washington Capitals picked up the electric forward in Anthony Mantha.
Just to add on that one there, Anders Bjork was part of that trade going back to Buffalo in the Taylor Hall trade. Noah Grant, not the best writer, but he'll bring you this one here. Last Monday, San Jose Sharks forward Patrick Marleau broke Gordie Howe's long-standing record of most games played in the National Hockey League, playing in his 1,768th game against Vegas. The record, which has been active since 1980, was broken by the 41-year-old Marleau, who is in his 23rd NHL season. In 21 of those seasons with the Sharks, he currently has 566 career goals, and the Sharks veteran began his career with San Jose on October 1st, 1997, after going second overall in that year's draft. Nick, to put that in perspective, the Hartford Whalers moved to Carolina that year. Nashville, Minnesota, and the Atlanta Thrashers / Winnipeg Jets 2.0 didn't even exist yet. Mario Lemieux won the Art Ross Trophy. The Florida Marlins were weeks away from their first World Series. And the last year of the Chicago Bulls dynasty, featuring Michael Jordan, Scottie Pippen, and Dennis Rodman, was in full effect. The most popular show on TV was the final season of Seinfeld. The movie Titanic would come out months later, and the top spot on the billboards was Boyz II Men's 4 Seasons of Loneliness. Marleau, who has 8 points in 44 games this year, faced a Vegas club that will not play 1,668 total games as a franchise until sometime around the start of the 2039 NHL season.
I wonder if I'll be alive by then. In other records, Pittsburgh superstar Sidney Crosby joined historic company as he tallied his 16th straight point-per-game season yesterday. Only Gordie Howe and Wayne Gretzky have managed more seasons with a point-per-game pace, with 17 and 19 respectively. In Washington, defenseman Zdeno Chara became the 5th defenseman and 13th player in NHL history to reach the 1,600-game mark. Selected in the 1996 draft, Chara joins defensemen Chris Chelios, Scott Stevens, Larry Murphy, and Ray Bourque in the 1,600-game club. And Florida fellow blue liner Keith Yandle earned sole possession of second place on the NHL's Ironman list, playing in his 915th consecutive game yesterday, passing Gary Unger. Doug Jarvis holds the all-time record at 964 games. Yandle has not missed a single game since the 2008-2009 season.
I also haven't missed a single game either, Nick. I've just been watching them on the TV. Speaking of the TV, in local news, the Minnesota Wild are the latest club to clinch a playoff berth after their 6-3 victory yesterday over San Jose. Vegas and Colorado are the only other teams that have already punched their ticket to the postseason in the West. The Wild have ridden the hot streak of rookie sensation Kirill Kaprizov, who became the first Wild rookie to score 20 goals in a season and tally 4 consecutive games with a point after passing Marian Gaborik, who had 19 goals in a full 82-game season. Kaprizov looks to add on to his 22 goals and 41 points during this week's action, which features a 3-game stint against St. Louis starting Wednesday.
In our penultimate topic for you this afternoon, there will be a bevy of NHL extensions at the trade deadline. Well, Time Wild inked bottom 6 forward Ryan Hartman to a 3-year, $1.7 million average annual deal, while Winnipeg inked Adam Lowry to a 5-year, $16.25 million extension. Los Angeles added former Duluth Bulldog Alex Iafallo to a 4-year, $16 million deal. Arizona nabbed Ilya Lyubushkin to a 1-year extension, and Edmonton signed a Dylan Holloway to an entry-level contract. Holloway was the Oilers' first-round pick in the 2020 draft. Out east, Washington extended forward Karen Sherry. Philadelphia nabbed forward Scott Laughton for 5 more years, and Florida signed former New Jersey Devil Nikita Gusev to a 1-year, $1 million deal.
In the final topic of our weekly roundup, more injuries continue to litter the National Hockey League. Out west, Anaheim's Jakob Silfverberg will miss 6 months after hip surgery. Edmonton's Zach Kassian is week to week with a lower body ailment. And Dallas, unfortunately, will be without goaltender Ben Bishop and forward Alexander Radulov for the rest of the year. In the East, Montreal netminder Carey Price is still dealing with a concussion. Toronto is without both defenseman Zach Bogosian for 4 weeks because of his shoulder, as well as forward Zach Hyman for 2 weeks with an ACL sprain. Tampa Bay is missing forward Steven Stamkos, who is likely to miss at least a month with a lower body issue. Detroit's Dylan Larkin and Buffalo's Jack Eichel are both done for the year. And the Sabres are also without goaltender Linus Ullmark, who is week to week with a lower body injury. Lastly, the Washington Capitals missed a familiar face, Alexander Ovechkin, for the first time since 2015, as he was forced out of yesterday's game on Saturday with a lower body concern. The grade 8 is listed as day-to-day. And once again, welcome into episode number 58. I'm Noah Grant, joined alongside my co-host Nick Maxon. Nick, we've got a lot to get to just in general in the hockey world, of course, having a week off. First off, let's start with you, though. What the heck did you do on your week off? Did you sit around? Did you have a couple of alcoholic beverages? Like, what was the plan for Nick Maxon on his rare Sunday off?
Not much. Still have some classwork to get done. The end of the semester is coming up in a couple of weeks, so projects are coming due. So not a whole lot of laying around for me just yet. Still trying to get to the finish line first before we can relax. But, honestly, also trying to enjoy a little bit of the weather, honestly. Mm-hmm. It's been up and down here in the Twin Cities, but at the end of it, just still trying to power through. You were pretty busy, though, up there in North Dakota there, Noah, if you want to tell the fans what you did over the last week. Yeah,
well, I've got my ACHA jacket on here, and of course you got the NCHC and the WCHA logos behind me, so who knows how much trademarking nightmares we're going to get into as far as being sued by somebody. No, it was a lot of fun. So for those who didn't know, I was calling the ACHA Women's Division I National Hockey Tournament, which was here in Minot. It was 12 games in 5 days, so we called 720 minutes of hockey in those 5 days. The first 4 days were 10-hour days at the rink, and the last day was a 5-hour day. So it was a lot of hockey in a short time. A lot of cool things came out of it, though. Potentially, I might be doing color commentary for the Minot Minotauros in the NAHL for the next couple of years as a result of someone listening in on that tournament. And I got asked to do a couple of developmental things with some of the hockey programs that came through. Met a lot of great people, a lot of great coaches. And I don't know, it was just a really fun experience. And it was kind of weird when I was getting ready to put the notes together for the show, specifically for the weekly roundup. And I don't know, it just felt like we haven't done this show in forever. And I kind of, for the first time, started to realize how hard we were going, especially during playoff time with men's hockey. I know that sounds kind of obvious, but I don't know. It just was we put a lot of time and energy into the show that sometimes you don't realize until you take a week off. But speaking of that, Nick, one of the things that we are going to add, actually two things. First of all, for the fans, as they say, Two-Line Fan Trivia. Season 2 is going to start this week on May 1st, Saturday, May 1st at 12 p.m. And it's going to run through November 18th. Of course, the men's hockey season starts on November 5th, but May 1st through November 18th, that is 25 weeks, if my math is correct, in which you have a chance to win. If you are a first-time winner, you will get a hat from the Huskies Warming House podcast. And of course, if you've already won before, either in season 1 or season 2, you already have your hat. So congratulations. But the reason I mentioned this change is because for season 2, unlike season number 1, we are not going to have eligibility restrictions where if you win 1 week, you have to sit out the next week to give someone else a chance. It is a free-for-all. Every week, everyone is going to be eligible for season 2 of trivia. I think we're at that point now. Congratulations to Brody Falconer, who was our season 1 trivia winner. I got a feeling maybe Tanner Heath might be setting some alarms and have a good push for season number 2. Once again, May 1st through November 18th, 25 weeks that you'll have a chance to be a winner from the Huskies Warming House podcast. The other thing that we're going to add as well to Nick is something that we're going to try to kind of roll out here And that is going to be called the Huskies Warming House Extra Ice Session. And what that is going to be is that after our Huskies Illustrated Weekly Roundup, around the 40-minute mark of each show, we're going to kind of quote unquote end the regular portion of the show. And that's where we're going to do a deep dive into a topic or a discussion, either from the show or a new topic to end the show. We're going to try to keep the shows around an hour if we can for our Sunday shows. So with that, Nick, I kind of had you sitting there just looking pretty, unfortunately. So let's ask your opinion here, since you probably know a little bit more about this than I do. Let's talk about the men's hockey team for St. Cloud State. Got a couple players that are staying, a couple players that are leaving. I don't know if the people that are leaving were that surprising, but a couple players, I think St. Cloud State's happy to have them back in a Huskies uniform for another year.
100%. I think the couple of big ones that show up would be Easton Brodzinski as well as Kevin Fitzgerald, who have confirmed that they will be returning. Luke Jaycock's also coming back. So that's huge. Sam Henches and Nick Perbix apparently had talks with their respective teams, the Minnesota Wild and the Tampa Bay Lightning, respectively. From what we know is that they are deciding to return to the Huskies again for next year. And the departures, if you want to call it so far, what we know is going to be defenseman Tyler Anderson, but he is going on to medical school, so congratulations to Tyler. And then also for Will Hammer, who had an internship lined up for the future part of his career. He's accepted that, so he will not return for 2021-22. But I would think for Huskies fans, for the folks that are returning, that's some pretty good news. The one piece that we do not have an answer on right now is goaltender David Renick. Again, he is a Los Angeles Kings draft pick. Supposedly he is in talks with them and apparently still trying to decide his future. So that is the last piece of the puzzle. I think we're still waiting for confirmation on, but I think we still have a pretty good picture of what's happening here so far, Noah.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think the thing for David Renick is, and one thing that might work in St. Cloud State hockey fans' favor, potentially, I guess. It could go either way depending on how he looks at the situation. You've got a Los Angeles Kings club that, one, isn't very good, not going to be making a playoff push, I don't think. The other thing, though, as a goaltender is, do you believe that you can fit into that lineup right away and make an impact? Do you believe that you're going to be the guy that can make that jump right away? So I think that's kind of what maybe is going through David's head. Of course, Jonathan Quick getting up there in years and kind of moving on from I don't think Los Angeles is going to re-sign him. And if they do, it'll be probably in a backup role or a team-friendly deal. The other person I think that we mentioned, I guess, as a quote-unquote departure, if you will, would be Jared Cockrell. I saw that he had a point, his first point with the Wheeling Nailers the other night. Of course, his team lost 5-2 in that contest. So congratulations to him for his first professional point as well. Yeah, I think the one that I don't know, surprised, but just really happy to see him back was Nick Perbix, because I think there's a guy that maybe, and that's no offense to anybody else, I just think he's a guy that maybe is ready to be close to making that jump to the National Hockey League. But I think a year of development will continue to serve him well, and he could be a real breakout candidate next year. I'd like to see, a player that was going to stay, hopefully anyway, that's Vieti Miettinen. I'd like to see his game continue to grow. Maybe he gets a little bit stronger. I'd like to see him spend some time with Jami Krannila, maybe get a little bit bigger in the weight room and kind of have the sophomore season that Krannila had this year, helping them out as fellow Finns. But Nick, next year is right around the corner, or so it feels like. It feels like we just got done with the men's hockey season, and we're already talking about the newly released schedule for the NCHC that came out. 24 games, 24 conference games on the docket so far. 4 games, of course, that's 2 weekend series versus every team in the NCHC except for Miami and Denver, who are kind of plugged in the middle of that schedule. Season starts November 5th versus Colorado College. St. Cloud State, I believe, will be the first team that will kind of christen the brand new arena in Colorado College, if I'm not mistaken. Of course, they got a new head coach there. And then the season will end as usual, March 5th, up at Amsoil Arena at the University of Minnesota Duluth. Nick, I know it's probably a pretty cut and dry schedule. I guess my 2 questions are, 1, what do you think of the schedule? And do you think there will be any additions at any point to the schedule, barring, COVID? Do you think there'll be a holiday tournament? Do you think there will be more to this schedule than the 24 games we see?
Yes. As far as overall schedule, yes. Obviously, conference schedule, that's set in stone. But I would think that, no question, the exhibition schedule has been rumored that St. Cloud will be playing Mankato. There's also maybe talks of a home-and-home series with the Minnesota Gophers. So kind of where we got our start last year when we talked to Bob Motzko, when we talked to Don Lucia of the CCHA, and then also Brett Larson, that there seemed to be a collaborative effort to try to get some of these old rivalries, these in-state rivalries that are not in the same conference to play each other. And they talked about using that exhibition schedule. Now, it sounds like the rumors are that's actually starting to come to fruition. Obviously, that hasn't been officially announced yet, but there's even Bruce Siskey, also up from Duluth, has also chimed in and saying he's hearing the same thing. So I think there is some traction here, and I would love to see this schedule happen if that is true.
Yeah. Is there a particular rivalry, like when you go back, obviously, to the old WCHA, is there a particular, maybe one or two teams that you would really like to see make a visit to the Herb Brooks National Hockey Center, or vice versa?
Mankato 1 for sure, the Gophers 2, and I would even like to see Wisconsin, honestly. I think those are the 3 clubs that I think would draw some fans. I know that as far as, name recognition, those are the big ones. And I know for any Gophers fans out there, if North Dakota would make a trip down to Mariucci and the Gophers back up to Ralph Engelstad, that would draw some nice exhibition interaction between those 2 very passionate fan bases. So it can only go up from here. So I really do hope that continues to have some wheels turn and get some traction on that.
Yeah, I know we talked about this quite extensively last summer. So I was at that Thanksgiving Day game that was North Dakota versus Minnesota, where North Dakota walked all over the Gophers. I can just hear Huskies fans saying, "We hate both of those teams, so nobody wins when somebody wins." But the one thing that was insane, and I guess I can reveal this, is that my dad and I sat at center ice, right, pretty much up right where the concourse level is. We were like 2 seats down right on the center ice line. And the tickets combined were like $220 for 2 tickets, combined. And that's just absurd for a college hockey game, especially on Thanksgiving. So again, I think that there's a piece there that how do these teams generate revenue? How do they generate interest, but also kind of stay within the constraints of making it still a family-friendly thing? The big thing for us was, my dad and I, the closest we ever got to actually seeing North Dakota play Minnesota as a kid was actually 2006. We were hoping that, Minnesota was going to take care of Holy Cross and end up facing North Dakota, who I believe beat Michigan in that regional tournament in Grand Forks. So I don't know. It's just college hockey I think has a lot of work to be done, like we've talked about with that. But speaking of a lot of work to be done, Nick, one topic that we also kind of took note of, and we mentioned in the Huskies Illustrated Weekly Roundup, is the fact that the Women's World Championships were abruptly canceled. They were supposed to start on May 6th, and it really seems like the IIHF didn't really have contingency plans in place. Kind of leaving the sport as somewhat of an afterthought, unfortunately, for women's hockey. I think, to put it plainly, you and I said before the show, and pardon my French, the IIHF just kind of pretty much said, we don't give a shit. I mean, what was your reaction to that? Because for me, I was pretty ticked off by it.
Pretty upset, and I'm kind of surprised a little bit, because if you think, would they really have this sort of planning if it were the men's? No. Mm-hmm. That they would have taken more into consideration the placement of the original tournament. Would there be restrictions? There's a whole lot of pre-planning that's involved, talking to officials to try to prevent this sort of thing. And darn well as I do, there would have been a contingency plan in place. With the women's side, the fact that now, so it's one thing, I should preface this too. It's one thing to have, a cancellation, not have a contingency plan, but also then to go, okay, yeah, we did a backup plan, but now we need to figure out something. The fact that they didn't even go that far to say, yeah, we didn't have one, but we're going to try to figure this out. The fact that there hasn't been any language, again, I think Kendall Coyne, Schofield, and Hillary Knight are right on. They don't care. And that's horrible for women's hockey. I believe Dallas, if I remember correctly, actually kind of raised a hand, if you want to call the city of Dallas, and said, we're willing to try to make this work if we can. I'm not sure how much push or leverage they would have in making that happen, but terrible for the athletes, terrible the look for the IIHF, and a very, not so, good look for anybody that's involved, and it certainly just hurts obviously the athletes and the teams involved. So just not great news for the hockey world.
Yeah, I think if I remember right, it was something like just under 260 players that, pretty much are going back home. Some of those players had started that 8-day quarantine process and started to kind of go through those sorts of things. And it's like, I think it was, like you mentioned, I think it was Kendall Coyne that said it best. There's 250 players that are going home that the best answer they got was, well, we don't know. We weren't prepared. It's not going to be a thing. And that's, again, like you mentioned, when I was talking with a couple of women's hockey coaches last weekend at the ACHA tournament, we kind of talked about the growth of the game. And, it was interesting to be playing a tournament in the later parts of April as far as college hockey, especially women's college hockey, was concerned. But then you talk about the viability of the sport, and it just seems like you take 2 steps forward and 1.5 steps back when it comes to women's hockey. And the problem is so cyclic because they just never really afford an opportunity for, these sorts of programs to really start to get going. And I don't know, I was really frustrated by it. I figured we'd give it at least a couple minutes to talk about that because I don't know, it's just things like that are so mind-blowingly aggravating. Why, like you mentioned, the biggest thing is, it's one thing if the men's and women's worlds are both in the same page, right? Where they say, hey, they're both in Toronto. All of a sudden we've got this huge, COVID outbreak or whatever it is. We can't do it, but we're going to move it over to Edmonton or we're going to move it to Buffalo, New York. That's one thing. But like you mentioned, no parity related to the men's tournament. And number 2, no secondary plan. I would say of all the 2 years in world history to have a secondary plan for any and all events that you schedule, 2020 and 2021 would be some pretty good years to maybe think about a backup plan for a lot of things.
It's just unacceptable, honestly.
Yeah,
Just is as you mentioned, it's the 250 athletes that really heard from this. But, you talk about the growth of the game, but what does that say to the athletes, that spent all the time training and trying to get through this, that, all this hard work and, the excitement to try to get to this stage, and then they get sent home with really just like, well, we didn't plan for it. And especially, like you said, we're in it's been 14 months essentially coming up here quick about dealing with this pandemic. How the heck do you not have a secondary plan? It just speaks very loudly to how, the AAHF honestly is treating women's hockey. And it's just horrible and unacceptable.
Yeah, just disappointing. Speaking of treatment, Nick, the other topic, one of them that we had in the weekly roundup that I wanted to get your opinion on, because I'm kind of on the fence about this one, and that was the story about the Seattle Kraken and the Kraken Bar and Grill, or that dive bar that is suing the Kraken for $3.5 million. Now, I don't know about the money amount. That one's kind of iffy for me. That's a lot of money. But in some respects, I guess I can kind of understand the bar's position. They're not a sports bar. That's not what they do. They're a dive bar. I guess it's not a bad thing that new patrons are coming in, but I think the problem was that new patrons are coming in expecting it to be like a Seattle Kraken themed, bar. And they're like, well, no, we do punk bands and metal bands and we do rock and it's a dive bar. And that's kind of what we do. So what were your thoughts on this? Do you think the bar has any sort of a case? Do you think they're, no, you don't think so?
No. Trademark infringement is very weird, in a case. And unfortunately for this bar, when you're going up against a huge business, that's the NHL, they're not going to win this case. Number 2, the argument that their patrons are coming in, that's not something anybody can handle, right? So all the NHL has to argue is, well, what if, these people who are visiting don't know who you are, just walk in and say, oh, that's a punk band. Well, just because you single out the people who are wearing a Kraken jersey and now you're complaining about that, that's not an argument's sake. So essentially what their argument is that, hey, you're changing our business plan. You're confusing our patrons. At the end of it, that's not something anybody can control. So at the end of it, I think they lose this case. I understand for them, they're seeing a changing business model, and it's sad. I mean, I'm never in a person that says, I want to see a business go under, and especially for one that seems to have a pretty tried and true identity about who they are. But in a case like this, I think they're swimming upstream legally in this case.
Yeah, one of the words, apparently I pronounced it wrong because I can't read. Shocker. It's tortious interference.
Tortious interference. Yeah.
Yeah.
Tortious interference. Yeah.
Explain, what does that even mean?
If I recall correctly, and granted, I'm not a legal expert, hashtag not legal advice. I believe that essentially that means that the logo is, or something of the namesake is interfering with their business practice or something like that. So we might have to get a legal expert to let us know on that, leave it in the comments or whatnot. But yeah, I can't say I know exactly for sure, but that's my interpretation of it. But, as I mentioned before, I don't see a pathway to success here. There's not even going to be a settlement in this case. Maybe, I don't think, just because, I mean, it's a silly lawsuit. I hate to say it, the way that they are presenting the case, in my personal opinion. If they were to try to trademark the name sake, they may have a case there, but it's still, when they're going up against the money and the power of the NHL, I just don't think they have a shot to come out on top.
Yeah, tortious interference. It just sounds like a Tim Peel call, doesn't it?
It sounds like a makeup call, yeah.
I don't know. So normally, like we mentioned, our new segment, the Huskies Warming House Extra Ice Session, we tried to do it at the 40-minute mark. We're coming up on just a little bit at the 30-minute mark here, and kind of expecting it maybe as we move into the summer to be a little bit of a shorter show in general, just because of the lack of substance. And we'll probably be a little bit more NHL heavy as we follow the Minnesota Wild. So we're going to kind of start to move on over to that Extra Ice Session here. The one thing I do want to mention, if listeners are tuning out at this point, is that we are hoping to have an interview this week with Brett Larson. Of course, we were trying to catch up with him last week, but he's on vacation in Florida. Good for him. Much deserved. And
coaches conference.
Yeah, well, vacation, quote unquote.
Yeah.
I don't know. Talking hockey is always a vacation, right? But we're going to try to have an interview with him this week and hopefully have that out as our Healthy Scratch interview segment for episode number 59. So that does mean we don't have a guest lined up for this week. It's kind of a slow rollout here for the Huskies Warming House podcast, but stick around for the Huskies Warming House Extra Ice Session, where we're going to do a deep dive into what it means for the Minnesota Wild and their playoff hopes, what we think the bracket is going to look like, and where do the Minnesota Wild ultimately finish in the NHL playoffs. Welcome into the Huskies Warming House podcast Extra Ice Session. Of course, doing a deep dive into the Minnesota Wild clinching their playoff spot against the San Jose Sharks yesterday on Saturday. Nick, first of all, taking a look at the bracket, the only other two teams that we mentioned that have clinched their playoff spots, Vegas and Colorado, respectively. Vegas currently 4 points ahead of Colorado with 2 games not in hand, if you will. It's separated by 4 points there. So kind of anyone's guess to see where the Avalanche and the Vegas Golden Knights finish as far as the 1 and 2 spot. Minnesota, I don't know if I would say they're safely in the 3rd spot, but they kind of seem pretty hard to touch if you're St. Louis or Arizona, who's vying for that 4th and final spot on that docket. In your opinion here, if we go back first to the beginning of the season, did you think, that the Minnesota Wild would, make the playoffs, but number 2, that they would be a 3rd seed in the West right now?
I think when we talked about this, a few months ago at the start of the season, that, we had them kind of pegged as a bubble team, that they would finish kind of in that 4th spot. That St. Louis would be in a much better position than they are now. I think we both had Colorado and Vegas sitting at top 1 and 2 where they are respectively. But, for this team, as we've watched them over the course of this year, Noah, one thing that we talked about before we started recording this morning was, this team has got some secondary scoring to it. This team has got a good bottom 6 in hand, and they're playing really, really good hockey right now. And also goaltending has been really, really rock solid. I think that was kind of a question mark coming into this year, departing essentially from both Devin Dubnyk and then Alex Stalock respectively after he was injured, came back, he was put on waivers. So now you have Cam Talbot and Kaapo Kähkönen, who was a rookie himself, the other rookie on the Minnesota Wild spot, who's been playing really, really good hockey between the pipes for the Wild. This is a little bit of a surprise for me. Because if you actually take a look, Noah, at the standings here for the National Hockey League in that West Division here,
they're 1 point away from Colorado. And Colorado 2 games.
1 point away from Colorado, mind you, Colorado. 2 games in hand, and then you're only sitting 5 points away from Vegas, and we know how good Vegas is right now. So I mean, it's a little bit of a surprise. I won't lie to you. And this team, I think, is kind of a pseudo dark horse to kind of come out of the West, possibly to make a deep run. Now I have my questions some reservations about it, but I do believe they have kind of that dark horse look to them right now that, maybe they could sneak away with between Vegas or Colorado. It kind of depends on that matchup. I'll have you kind of set it up, but I definitely think I actually think they're safe in third. I don't think that they are going to drop to fourth. I just don't see that happening with the how many games are left. I just don't see that happening. I don't think that they eclipse Vegas or Colorado unless both of them fall off of a cliff, which I don't think are going to happen. And so I do think they sit in third, and I do think that's where they enter the Stanley Cup playoffs as third in the Honda West Division.
So it's kind of interesting here. Interesting to think about. One, Vegas is currently on a 9-game winning streak right now. They're 9-1 in their last 10. Minnesota is 8-1-1 in their last 10 on a 7-game win streak. Interestingly enough, as you mentioned, so to break down the points, Vegas, 47 games played, 34 wins, 11 losses, 2 OT losses. That's 70 points. That's a 7.45 winning percentage. Not too shabby of a year for the Vegas Golden Knights. Interesting. I don't know if Minnesota can overtake Colorado. Colorado has a couple games in hand, and really the Avs have really kind of had Minnesota's number this year in the head-to-head matchups. Not that that makes a whole heck of a lot of difference, but just to point that out there, if it is the 2-3 matchup that we were talking about. 45 games for the Colorado Avalanche, 31 wins, 10 losses, 4 OT finishes for 66 points and a 7.33 winning percentage. They just are on a 1-game losing streak, losing the other night. Minnesota on their 7-game winning streak, 47 games played, the same as Vegas, 31 wins, tying Colorado, 13 losses though, and 3 OT finishes, 65 points, 1 point back, and a 6.91 winning percentage. I don't know that I would have ever expected this group to be at a 6.91 winning percentage. Interestingly enough, as you look at Vegas, plus 57 in the goal column, not bad. Plus 53 for Colorado. Minnesota's only at plus 28. So it kind of tells you that similar to the St. Cloud State Huskies when they made their playoff run, when you look back at the regular season, they were a group that, they weren't blowing opponents out of the water. They were kind of this battle-tested group that, kind of had the ebbs and flows of winning these tight, close hockey games, which I think bodes well as you move into playoff time. Arizona, like you mentioned, and St. Louis are in 4 and 5, respectively, separated by a point. Their goal differentials are minus 22 and minus 11, respectively. So I don't know if the 4 seed really is having going to have a very good luck of the draw. But right now, as you mentioned, Vegas would face Arizona currently, although St. Louis has 3 games in hand. So Arizona or St. Louis, and then Colorado would be the 2 seed facing Minnesota, and the winners of each of those series would get each other in the second round of the playoffs. So Nick, I want to get your opinion. One, why are Arizona and St. Louis kind of so far below the top 3 teams in this conference? And then number 2, which team, if any, or which team do you think makes it out of the regular season and into the playoffs in that 4 seed?
That's a tough one. First of all, Arizona has been inconsistent all year. The big thing between both these clubs has been goaltending. St. Louis extended Jordan Binnington that 5-year deal. He definitely has not had that same season that he had when he won the Stanley Cup. Arizona, again, they're just kind of an inconsistent team. They're not getting, sort of that timely goal scoring. And there's times where Darcy Kemper also will let in, a few more goals than he probably should. So as you mentioned, minus 22, minus 11. I think somehow St. Louis is going to sneak into this only because that they have that 3 games in hand right now. Remember that they had a pause for us with COVID, and mind you, a lot of Minnesota's remaining games are against St. Louis, so that could factor in as well. And St. Louis has always given Minnesota fits in recent years, although defensively their identity has not been the same this year. So it's a tough draw for them in that group, but that's for those 2 teams respectively. They're just not getting the scoring. Again, you talk about the goals for 160, 161, and 151 respectively between Vegas, Colorado, and Minnesota, and then it just drops. Arizona 128, St. Louis 131, San Jose 125, but then the goals against us really climb. Again, 150, 142, 163. So that to me is the big difference. Again, you're just not getting the scoring and you're not getting the timely stops. And that's why those 2 are separated between Minnesota by right now. Whoa, geez. Was it 19, 18 points? Yeah, 18 points right now.
Yeah, that's a lot of math. Too much math for me. One of the things, I totally agree with you. I think St. Louis is going to be the team that comes out of this. I think if anything, with their goaltending woes, the biggest thing is if their goal scorers could even halfway show up, I think they're going to be all right. But again, Minnesota could kind of control Arizona's fate a little bit this week. Like you mentioned, 3 games and 5 days against St. Louis this week. So that could shake things up as well. This Arizona group, though, I in a weird way, I feel like they're deadlier in the postseason. I don't know if that's an odd thing to say, but like you mentioned, they're wildly inconsistent, but they've been a group that even with Minnesota have shown to be a streaky scoring team and have given a lot of groups some fits when it comes to their play as well. But again, that consistency piece, I think, is a big factor, as you mentioned. I think the best case scenario for Minnesota, to be honest with you, if they can't do it themselves, again, Colorado has 2 games in hand on pretty much everybody in this bracket except for St. Louis. I think the best thing would be if Colorado starts to go on a tear and Vegas starts to lose games. I don't know that I want Colorado in the first round if I'm Minnesota in that 2-3 matchup, so I think that the best case is either Minnesota or Colorado can slip into that one spot there and they don't have to face each other in the first round. I'd like to see Colorado kind of get beat up by whoever they're playing a little bit, or at best / worst, I guess, Colorado walks over their first round opponent as the 1 seed and has to wait a little bit while Minnesota maybe dukes out a 5 or 6 game series. And again, I know that sounds odd to people, but it also means that Minnesota might be a little bit more kind of in rhythm as far as that's concerned if they can get out of the first round. So let me ask you that, Nick. Ultimately, where do they finish 1 through 4, and who wins the 1 versus 4 and 2 versus 3 matchup to force the second round matchup in the playoffs?
Well, that's tough. Again, I think it stays where it's at. I think Vegas stays in the 1. I think Colorado stays 2, Minnesota 3. I think, as you mentioned, I think St. Louis can sneak in over Arizona just because of the games in hand. So you have Vegas over St. Louis. And I hate to say this, Wild fans, but as you mentioned, you're absolutely right. Colorado has just had Minnesota's number this year. That top line, McKinnon, Landeskog, and Rantanen just does not seem to have a defensive answer for that 3 this year. They have walked all over the Wild the last couple of games that they faced them, including a pretty big blowout recently against those 2 squads. So I don't have great confidence in that matchup. Now, as you mentioned, if somehow Colorado eclipses Vegas, I would rather have that matchup between those 2 clubs. They play very similar styles. I like the depth, both those teams up against each other. I think Minnesota actually has an edge in the bottom 6 against Vegas. And just historically, Minnesota has, for whatever reason, played very, very well against the Golden Knights. So that would be the best case scenario for Minnesota, but I don't think it moves too much, and I think Minnesota might be a first round exit against the Colorado Avalanche, who I think are maybe destined to do a very deep cup run this year with the roster that they have.
Yeah, Minnesota with the Kirill Kaprizov getting to the 20 goal mark this year leaves Vegas as the only group to not have a rookie that's hit the 20 goal mark yet in franchise history. I'm going to disagree with you a little bit here because it's fun. Why not? But I actually do disagree with you. I think Colorado slips into that 1 spot, and here's why. 1, they have 2 games in hand, so theoretically, if they win the next 2 games, they'll be right up there with Vegas. But 2, Vegas is on a 9-game winning streak. I don't think what I've always seen is that when you're on a 9 or 10 game winning streak, and take note, Wild fans, on this one, it's usually followed by maybe losing 3 of your next 5, or 5 of your next 7, or something like that. So, not always. Sometimes teams are just that good. Look at the Tampa Bay Lightning the year before they got bounced in the first round by Columbus. They were a group that just kind of kept the train rolling, and I don't know if they had consecutive losses more than a couple times in that entire year. It was insane. I think Colorado finds a way to really kind of turn it on at this point in the season, especially I know they had the addition of Devin Dubnyk. They're kind of cycling through their goaltenders, and they've had a couple of injury bugs throughout the season. I don't know. I just think they're a group that with 2 games in hand, they're hungry. They're going to be feeling it. They're 8-2 in their last 10. Let's put that into perspective. They lost the other night, but their win streak was up there as well.
I believe 6-game win streak, if I recall.
Yeah, so it's one of those things where, I don't know, I just think Colorado finds a way to slip into that 1 spot. So that's what I'm going with. I'm going to live and die by the sword here. I think Colorado, like you mentioned, I think St. Louis is going to be in that 4 spot here. I'm writing down the brackets so we can't cheat on each other here. So, and then I got Vegas taking on Minnesota. And this is where, one, I hope I'm right, because as you mentioned so eloquently, I think Minnesota has a better edge in that matchup. I actually think Minnesota comes out of that one in 6 games. Colorado comes out of that one against St. Louis, but I think it'll be a lengthier series than, like you mentioned, Colorado versus Minnesota. So looking at the second round matchups, I've got Colorado against Minnesota. You've got Vegas against Colorado. I think you kind of mentioned it, but who comes out of your Vegas-Colorado matchup to go to the Western Conference Final?
Actually, I think Vegas stalls Colorado here in this one. Yeah, see, see, exactly. And here's why.
Mister, I think Colorado's primed for a deep cup run, but Vegas is going to stop them. I'm just kidding. But
yes, actually, it's the one team that has got the X factor, and that is Marc-Andre Fleury. I think if Marc-Andre Fleury has actually been playing some really good hockey as of late, he could be the one X factor to stop the big guns of McKinnon, Landeskog, and Rantanen. And I think Colorado's depth scoring to me is not as dangerous as Vegas in this matchup. I like the physicality matchup too in this matchup. So I'm going to take Vegas in 6 over Colorado for them to be in that West final, whoever comes out of that matchup.
Interesting. I got Colorado over Minnesota in the second round. I think it'll be a hairier series than it would be in the first round, if that makes sense. I still think Colorado comes out of that one. I think Colorado punches their ticket to the Western Conference Final. Nick, do you have the standings pulled up in the National Hockey League by chance?
I do, yes. Yes,
okay.
I do.
I figured you were prepared, but I just wanted to make sure the listeners knew you were. So maybe let's take a look. Let's take a look at the other conference in the quote-unquote West, if you will. And if I'm not mistaken, do you remember the two brackets? Is it the Central that matches up with the West, and then it's the East and the North that are the two Eastern ones? Do I have that correct?
I believe so, yes.
Okay, we could totally be wrong because that's just what we do on the show is get things wrong. So let's take a look at the Central here. Do you want to kind of maybe do a deep dive-ish into just taking a look at the rest of the playoff bracket here? Is that something that would be down for? Just to see how wrong we really are going to be. So looking in the Central, of course, the Central looks a little different this year. A couple of Eastern teams that normally are not in this grouping. Carolina sitting first overall at 68 points. Florida at 67, but has 2 games more than any team on this list except for Nashville. 64 points is where Tampa Bay is at in the third spot, and then Nashville and Dallas in a dogfight for 4th and 5th at 54 and 52 points respectively. Chicago very narrowly in the mix at the 6th spot at number 49. I don't think they're going to punch their ticket, but they haven't been mathematically eliminated yet. And then Detroit and Columbus rounding out the 8 in that grouping there. For you, who finishes 1 through 4 in that grouping, and what are the results of those matchups?
Right where they sit, I think Carolina, Florida, Tampa are 1, 2, and 3 respectively. And how about the season Florida has had this year? Holy cow! Second year to Joel Quenneville. Oh my goodness gracious! A couple of those trades that they got, Patrick Hornquist making some good impact on that squad, and the goaltending that they've had. And it's not been Sergei Bobrovsky that has kind of been leading the charge there. It's been a rookie goaltender themselves. I do think Nashville does steal this 4th spot. I know Dallas has been making a good push.
A lot of injury problems, though.
And a lot of injury problems. And so that's why I think Nashville is going to have the edge here. So it would be Carolina versus Nashville, Florida versus Tampa. And how about that all Florida matchup that I think in years past we would say, oh, Tampa would be walking over, but I think this is a very intriguing matchup this year, Noah, between those two clubs. Especially, we still don't know the status of Nikita Kucherov coming back for Tampa Bay. Let's just assume he's back, and without some of those cap implications that I think people think that they're kind of skating around, which they are. Let's be fair.
They are. But the one thing to add there, though, is that the question mark is if Steven Stamkos isn't back, that might actually alleviate some cap hit, but you're without one of your best centers. So
100%. So yeah. I think Carolina does take care of Nashville pretty respectively. That's a very dangerous squad. And I'm actually going to go with this one and say Florida bounces Tampa in the first round there in the Discover Central. I think that we have an upset in the making. I think Florida is on kind of just a sensational kind of just a run right now. And I want to see that continue. So I think Florida takes care of Tampa.
Yeah, I actually agree with you 100%. I think this Florida group is as dangerous as we've seen since maybe 1996, to be honest with you. The last Florida group that we saw that was even remotely this dangerous, I think, was honestly, 2016, 2017, where they got bounced by John Tavares in that wraparound in Game 6. I thought that group, if they pushed that one to Game 7, maybe had a good chance as well. But I definitely agree with you. I think Tampa Bay, I think they're just, unfortunately, for being defending Stanley Cup champions, I just don't know that they have the makeup, unfortunately, to kind of continue that success because they've just had inconsistent lineups. That's the biggest thing. And it just seems like with Tampa, they always just have the injury bug that really has kept them down. I agree with you on Nashville as well. I don't think Nashville is going to be any sort of a test for Carolina, although we've seen crazier things happen. That Nashville group just has been decimated by injury as well, and I have not been impressed with their game. They're -5 in the goal differential, +14 for Dallas, who's trying to sneak up on them, but I don't think either of those opponents has a chance against Carolina, like you mentioned. Interesting as you look. So I know you have it pulled up. I was going to quiz you there, but I'm like, oh, he's got it pulled up on his his computer screen. So I'll just read it for the listeners here. +39 goal differential for Carolina, +25 for Florida, and +34 for Tampa Bay. So don't get me wrong. Tampa Bay is a team that I think is offensively loaded for bear. They just unfortunately haven't had any consistency in their lineup with some of their big guns being back. So that one will be a war, though. I mean, don't be shocked if Tampa Bay comes out of that one if they do indeed get Florida in the first round. That's going to be must watch hockey, if I can say it.
And you talk about Marc-Andre Fleury being the X factor. How about Andrei Vasilevsky for Tampa Bay? He could absolutely steal that series as well. He's without a doubt, in my mind, the best goaltender in the National Hockey League. I think he's even eclipsed Carey Price at this point, just because Carey Price, again, dealt with concussion. He hasn't really been the same this year, too, and I think a lot of that also is the team in front of him. But I think, if it's for Tampa to come out of Florida, it's going to be Vasilevsky's going to have to steal a couple of games from him in that series.
I mean, he's no Martin Jones, but
no.
I'm just kidding, San Jose fans. Your goaltender sucks, though. Anyway, so moving into that second round matchup, we both have Carolina and Florida. Who do you have coming out of that one?
Carolina. I just think they're the deeper team. I love the job Rod Brind'Amour has done with that squad. That squad buys into everything that they want. He's passionate. That group plays so well together. I think Carolina is also primed for another good run here, and I think they do eclipse Florida in a 7-game series, which would be a very big war on ice between those two squads.
Yeah, I agree with your 7-game assessment. I'm going with Florida on this one. I believe that group is kind of a dark horse candidate just because I like the makeup of their group. I think they're a group that kind of reminds me of the Minnesota Wild in 2014, the year that they took care of the Avs in 7 games in the first round, where they maybe weren't the quote unquote deepest team on paper, but I think they have good cohesion up and down their lineup. And how about, is it Nchc or Nchc?
Martin Nchc.
Oh my gosh, what a hockey player he is for Carolina on that side. So there's a guy that I think if you're Florida, you got to watch out for. But again, it's going to come down to goaltending in that matchup for that. And I don't know. I don't really know who has the edge. I'm feeling Florida. I can't really explain it for my lack of hockey knowledge. I can't really explain it. I just think that
it's close. It's close. And it's funny that, when we talk about the Central and the West, and you have these, 3 solid teams, and you have, sort of that, 2-team battle for the fourth. It's intriguing, those top 3. There's not much that separates them here in the Central, at least I think. The West, I think Colorado, again, you have that big 3, Nathan McKinnon there, who maybe sticks out a little bit. But Vegas, you can't, take away from Max Pacioretty, Mark Stone. They got a couple big guns there. And then for Minnesota, Kirill Kaprizov, who has been as advertised for the Minnesota Wild this year. He's been so fun to watch.
He's been okay.
Just okay, right?
Yeah, he's been unreal. So, Nick, moving into the last 10 minutes here, we've got 2 more divisions to get to here, or conferences, whatever, divisions. Holy smokes. You can tell that it's been a week off for the boys here. So, moving over to the Mass Mutual East Conference here, Nick, if you want to pull that one up. We've got Washington sitting in first place at 66 points. Pittsburgh right behind him at 65 points. Wild fans not happy to see that one as far as first-round draft picks are concerned, hoping they were going to drop off the face of the earth. The New York Islanders, also 48 games played, sitting at 63 points respectively. And Boston with 2 games in hand at 60 points. And then I suppose the dark horse candidate, the New York Rangers, who I thought have had an okay year, just really haven't gotten a whole lot of bounces. 48 games played for them and 54 points. I think they might be all but eliminated, but you never know. Crazier things have happened in hockey. Nick, who do you have in the 1 through 4 spot here in the Mass Mutual East?
Exactly as it reads. I think
is that your trend here? Is that your theme?
It kind of is a trend, yeah. It's so late to the season too. I just I don't see a whole lot of movement. Washington. The only question I have with Washington is how Alex Ovechkin's doing on the injury front. That might flip between Pittsburgh and Washington 1-2, but I think the Islanders and Boston round out 3 and 4. So I'll just stick with my guns there: Washington, Pittsburgh, Islanders, and Boston. And how about the Rangers? who I think if they didn't have as tough of a start here, Noah, would have been kind of more in the mix with this. They're at plus 30 in goal differential. They've had a nice bounce back second half of the shortened season. And I think, again, without that tough start, they may have been a little bit higher and would have been more competing for that fourth spot. And as you mentioned, crazier things have happened. They're only 6 points back, so 3 games. But again, they played 2 more games in Boston, who sits in 4th. So I think it's going to be a tougher battle. But I want to talk about this, though, before we get to the matchups, is how big of a disappointment has the Philadelphia Flyers been this year? Holy buckets. I mean, can you imagine this team they had a really good start, number one, and then they just seem to hit a wall, and they just haven't really been able to get the train back on the tracks. I would think that there's going to be some major changes coming to the Philadelphia Flyers organization coming this offseason, which I think is coming very shortly.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. I don't know what it was about that group, and they were a group that it's funny because last year kind of went on a tear before COVID hit. And they're just a group, and with Chuck Fletcher, former Minnesota Wild GM at the helm, they're just a streaky team. You know what I mean? And I don't know what it is where it just seems like if their offense and their goaltending is great, their defensive core is struggling. If their goaltenders are struggling, their offense and defense look all right, but they're not getting the saves they need. Or their offense dries up, but defensively and goaltenders, they're holding them in a game, but they can't find a way to get over the hump. Just kind of I don't want to say a comedy of errors, but I don't really know what else to call it. It's just kind of been a really odd season for Flyers fans. It's probably because NBC Philadelphia got rid of Katie Emmer. That's probably what the problem is, to be honest with you, Nick. Sorry, shots fired there. So I'm going to go almost similar to yours here. Washington's going to match up with the New York Islanders, who are going to be in 4, and Pittsburgh and Boston are at the 2 and 3 respectively. I think Boston with 2 games in hand makes a late season push. They're 7 and 3 in their last 10. Boston is against a 5-4-1 New York Islanders group that I think the Islanders actually are probably a deadlier matchup for Washington than people would give them credit for. Very stingy defensive group under Barry Trotz. I always like the Islanders. They kind of remind me, they're like the modified and improved 2017 Ottawa Senators, if you will, where they just play a nice defensive structure. So again, I've got Washington against the Islanders, but Pittsburgh against Boston. Nick, you've got Washington against Boston and Pittsburgh against the Islanders. So Washington, Boston, who do you got?
Washington on that one. Yep. And then I have Pittsburgh coming out against the Islanders. I just think as stingy as the Islanders are, they've had struggles with Pittsburgh this year. And I think the Penguins is not as good news for Minnesota Wild fans who are, again, hoping for a higher secondary first-round pick. Their hopes are gone. So I think it's going to be Pens Caps again coming into the second round here in the Mass Mutual East.
I always loved, ever since I was a kid, the people who used to put on social media, the pens versus caps, right? Like, the actual pens, like the writing utensil versus the caps off the pen. I don't know. It's cheesy, but I love it. So, and I think that'd be a fun matchup. For me, I got the New York Islanders beating the Washington Capitals in round number 1. How about that one for you? I like the matchup with Barry Trotz. He knows the system in Washington. Obviously, it's changed quite a bit, but I don't know. I like the defensive structure. I think that there's one team that could give the Capitals fits. I think it's them, and that's going to be my outrageous, I think, pick so far in the East is the New York Islanders. I think Pittsburgh comes out against Boston. I think that'll be a good series. So that'll be a gritty series. So I'm going to actually go hot take here. I'm going to go with the New York Islanders to make the conference final. How about that one? Again, I love defensive teams come playoff time. I like them in the past years as well, and then they really didn't show up on the on the offensive side as well. But I like the New York Islanders. I'm going to stick with them. You've got Washington and Pittsburgh, which, wow, have we seen that second round matchup a time or two in the past decade or so?
Not once. Not once at all. I think Pittsburgh comes out of this. I think they head over to the Eastern Conference Finals. I just like, again, when you get Sidney Crosby down the middle, and I think with Jason Zucker being relegated to the third line, he's actually had better production as of late. And again, some of those depth pieces with Pittsburgh, I think they come out of that and head over to the Eastern Conference Final over the Caps.
Yeah, how about that? Jason Zucker. I miss Jason Zucker. He used to be my favorite player, but I don't know. Do you have, speaking of which, while I pull up.
Just eclipsed.
Go ahead.
Just eclipsed 600 National Hockey League games, by the way. So he hit a milestone just recently.
I didn't know that. Well, there you go. I got to figure out. I don't really know who my new favorite player is. I mean, it's easy to say Kaprizov for the Minnesota Wild, but I don't know. I like Kevin Fiala's game. There's a guy that I also like on the Minnesota Wild. He's not my favorite player, but I love Nico Sturm's game as well. There's a guy that doesn't get highlighted very much in my personal opinion. But anyway, moving on to Scotia North here, our final one, the All-Canadian division, if you will. And that's a division that I think that a lot of people have been keeping their eyes on and really hasn't been as, I don't want to say as competitive, but it's been kind of a little more lopsided ish. I don't really know what I'm trying to say. It's just a weird group where it seems like nobody can really get on like a hot streak, if that makes sense. Maybe Toronto, if any team, but this group is just kind of beat up on each other, if you will. So we're looking here right now. Toronto, 48 games played, 65 points. They're kind of the lone group that I think stays where they're going to stay. Winnipeg at 57 points. Edmonton at 56 points with 2 games in hand on Winnipeg, 3 games in hand on Toronto, and Montreal with 1 game in hand on Winnipeg at 49 points. And then you've got Calgary with 1 game more played than Montreal at 45 points. I think Calgary's season is done. Vancouver and Ottawa rounding out the bottom 2 in that bracket. Nick, who do you got here for 1 versus 4?
I'm actually going to throw you a curveball. So Toronto, I think, is a bona fide number 1. I do think Edmonton sneaks up in the 2nd. I think Winnipeg slides to 3rd. And, it's funny, if you looked at the recent streaks here, Montreal and Calgary just played each other twice. And Calgary just beat Montreal twice. So it was an 8-point gap between those 2 squads, and now it's down to 4. And Calgary's been playing a little bit better hockey as of late. Calgary 5-5, Montreal 3-7. I'm gonna go with the surge of the Flames and say they are going to somehow piss off Marc Bergevin and everybody in Quebec province, and Calgary's going to eclipse Montreal to be your 4th spot, and they're the ones that are going to end up making the postseason to face Toronto in the first round, with Edmonton hosting Winnipeg also in that first round as well.
I've never seen Canadians to get too animated about their hockey. Have you? I don't know.
It's funny, if you really want to trigger Canadian hockey fans, the reason why they did the Scotia North was not because of the quarantine, was because they were sick. Was it 2 years ago when not a single Canadian team made the postseason? Well, now they have 4. So they just had to, get a pandemic as an excuse to mark 4 into the fold. So
I went there.
I went there.
All right. Fair. All right. I'm going to take a look here. Like you mentioned, I think Toronto definitely in that 1 spot. I think the Jets don't relinquish 2nd place. I like them down the stretch. I think Connor Hellebuyck's had a really nice year. Edmonton, though, that's going to be a heck of a war, regardless of who is the home team, if you will. If I can figure out how to write and talk at the same time here. Montreal sticks number 4 because I think if Carey Price returns in the next couple of games, I don't think Calgary has a shot. Sorry, Flames fans. I was rooting for you in 2004, and I think you still got screwed over in 2004, but you're not making the playoffs this year. I apologize. So I got Toronto facing Montreal, and I've got Winnipeg hosting Edmonton. So if I can write that down real hot here, Nick, you've got Toronto versus Calgary, Edmonton versus Winnipeg. Who do you have here?
I think Toronto does extinguish the Flames, unfortunately, even though they go on a ceremonious run to sneak into the playoffs. I think Toronto's just too deep of a squad. And then I have the Winnipeg Jets actually as the 3rd squad, upsetting the Edmonton Oilers. I do agree with you that Connor Hellebuyck to me looks really good. I like Winnipeg as a team, especially if Blake Wheeler is healthy. I know he's been kind of off and on with some upper body issues. So, but if he's in, Winnipeg to me is just it's just a tougher matchup for Edmonton. So I like Winnipeg over the Oilers in the first round.
Yeah, I like that as well. Toronto, I think Toronto sneaks out of that one. It's all going to come down to goaltending. Is Carey Price going to be the guy that steals steals a series, if you will, like he did against Pittsburgh last year? Although I thought the defensive effort from Montreal last year was really nice. Pittsburgh had a lot more problems in that series than just goaltending, if you will. I agree with you as well. I think Winnipeg comes out of that second grouping, but that Edmonton-Winnipeg series is going to be a war, an absolute war. So we both have Toronto and Winnipeg somehow making it against each other. Who do you got?
I'm going to trigger Leafs fans. Winnipeg. Toronto still is going to find a way to lose in the second round. Again, Freddie Anderson is not going to have a great series, and Winnipeg with Connor Hellebuyck, with a couple of really good, just some really good overall team play. And I really like Kyle Connor. I really like Mark Scheifele. I like the blue line of Winnipeg. I think they shut down Austin Matthews and. They shut down Mitch Marner. Joel Thornton, I don't know how he's still skating. They should have a walker on when he's out there. But at the end of it, I think Winnipeg takes down Toronto to really just make that city burn to the ground. And it's Winnipeg going into the Eastern Conference Final against the Maple Leafs.
I think the biggest hot take we've had in this entire thing is that we had Toronto getting out of the first round. There's our biggest thing. But I'm actually going to take the Leafs on this one. I think this is the year they finally punch their ticket. What better year would it be than a COVID year, if you will? But I think Toronto, I think this is the year where their depth finally is able to punch their way through. And I think they're going to do it in unceremonious fashion. I think this is going to be a group that you're finally going to start to see some of that physical engagement from some of the leaders. And I think it's going to be a group that finds a way through like gritty, wacky hockey games where they're maybe outplayed through various stretches of the games and then finds a way to hang in there. I don't know. I just feel something different about this Toronto group this year. I feel like that's all my picks, where I just feel something different and then watch all my picks be wrong. But nonetheless, they're all locked in. They're all on the trusty note cards that I have here. So we're going to take a look. Wrapping up the show here, Nick, at just over an hour. What is your one key for the Minnesota Wild finishing out the regular season to have good success and good traction moving into the playoffs?
They've been most successful when their transition game is going. To me, when they play north-south hockey, last couple of games when they're able to just transition again. I love the skating ability of our back end. And I think that's a big key for this squad because on the forecheck, I mean, Marcus Foligno, Nico Sturm, Zach Parise, Ryan Hartman, this group, Eric Renick, I mean, this group is absolutely suffocating on the forecheck. And then you put in the skill guys like Kaprizov, Kevin Fiala, just to name a few on that squad. They've got a lot of tools in the tool basket. But again, I think getting out of their own zone quickly and efficiently to allow them to play in the offensive zone is going to be key. I really like our goaltending, but to me, if you spend more time on the forecheck, I think we're a little susceptible in our own zone if we stick there for about 30 to 45 seconds. But, again, easy, clean breakouts, get the pucks deep, and I think they're good to go.
Kind of to piggyback off of yours, and also, how about the fact, great signing of Ryan Hartman for the next 3 years. Love that team-friendly deal. Also, a guy that has the same number of points as Zach Parise, sitting like 5th or 6th in points, has had a really good year, especially playing some bottom 6 minutes. But to your point, as you mentioned about kind of the depth scoring and, the liability potentially in your own zone, I think the key for Minnesota to keep the train rolling is putting players, your skill guys like Kirill Kaprizov and some of these younger guys, putting them in defensive situations and giving them defensive responsibility late in the season in games. So if you have a 3-2 hockey game where you're trying to hold a lead and you have a defensive zone draw, put Kaprizov's line out there. Let them kind of work through a little bit of that defensive piece of that. I know, don't put them out there and hope that they can hang on and you maybe give the game away. But I think putting players like that in that more defensively responsible structure so that when it comes playoff time, that ice starts to shrink. There's not a lot of open space there. Guys like that are more understanding of how to play in the corners and battle. Not that Kaprizov hasn't done that, but again, the time and space is going to shrink on Kirill when it comes into playoff time. So I think having him be comfortable, one, with the limited ice that he might see in the postseason, and two, with the defensive responsibility that might be required to hang on for a shift to keep the boys in it in a 2-2 game against Colorado in the postseason. I think that's my key, is getting guys to play a 200-foot game and understand that it might not be a flashy tic-tac-toe play that's going to end up being the difference maker in the postseason. So a little more grit, a little more defensive structure on that end, although Minnesota's defensive structure historically has been very good. And they've, like you mentioned, a great netminder in Cam Talbot in front of them. So I'm excited. Because I think if we were being honest, we wanted to see this Minnesota Wild group make the postseason. But if they made the postseason, we wanted them to sneak it or emphatically kick the door in and be in the postseason. We didn't want them to sneak in and maybe lose out on a potentially good draft pick or something. We wanted them to kind of be a group that solidified their ticket early, and they have. They've had a great season at 31 wins on the year. So with that being said, Nick, do you have anything else to add for the Huskies Warming House podcast?
Other than the fact, welcome back, fans.
Yeah.
It's been a good week off. We're definitely excited to welcome in Brett Larson sometime this week to kind of break down the season, as well as talk about the returners, as well as some of the new guys coming in. Jack Pert, Mason Solquist, and forgetting Josh Ludetke, I believe, is the three guys that have signed NLIs. So we'll touch base with them, and they can't look forward to that interview coming up sometime this week.
Yeah, it should be good. Like we mentioned, no Healthy Scratch interview segment this week, but we're working on next week, like Nick just said. Stay tuned, of course, for episode number 59 next Sunday, and then Brett Larson on the Healthy Scratch interview segment. And that will do it for episode number 58 here in the Den.
One-timer coming, they score! Ripped in! A bomb from Perix!
she scores! Dana Rasmussen for the Huskies alongside.
Dwayne Kaprizov in for a chance to win it. He scores! Kirill the Thrill is for real. Welcome to the NHL. A game winner.
St. Cloud Cathedral is now 42.6 seconds away from wrapping up the school's first ever title.